start streaming. Looks like it's going just fine, which means at this time, alright everybody, it's currently March 25th, 2018. Ed this is Education by Ed, and he's going to be talking about taxes. So first thing first, I want to, well, I was told to bring out this exhibit 05051 from the former IRS Commissioner Stephen Miller. It's a case they were working on, but again, listen to it. It states voluntary system. That doesn't mean that the IRS workers are voluntary working there. It means that taxes are voluntary. Listen to it.
When the liberal group got a exempt status, and 3 that I just mentioned didn't for over 2 years. Mr. Nunes mentioned Ms. Lerner. Who was her boss in 2011 and 2012? Who did she report to?
I believe it would have been
Sarah Ingram, maybe?
part of that time, and part of that time another gentleman.
Okay, and that other gentleman has since submitted his resignation?
I believe so.
And what is Ms. Ingram doing today? What's her job title?
She works on on implementing the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, who promoted her to that position?
I would have moved her into that position.
Why would you promote somebody to that position who was in charge of the exempt organization division, which certainly has had some controversy over the last couple years, under an investigation?
Because she is a superb civil servant, sir.
So she had nothing to do with this?
I wouldn't imagine so.
Even
By the way, I can't speak to individual cases. I can say generally, we provided horrible customer service here. I will admit that. We did. Horrible customer service.
You
Whether it was
targeted
politically motivated or not is a very different question.
You targeted an individual, an American who still doesn't know to this day why he was question number 26.
All right, time has expired. Mr. Becerra is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. And let me key off of something, Mr. Miller, you said. You said foolish mistakes were made. I think the President actually said it better. He said that the handling of those tax-exempt applications in that process at the IRS was outrageous and intolerable. No excuse. And as much as we know that the folks at IRS have a thankless job because they have to go and tell their fellow Americans that they may be audited or they have to do this work understaffed, we have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
And so you are right, it was a foolish mistake, but the President's even more correct that it was outrageous and intolerable. Now, let me also focus on something, Mr. George, you said. When you were asked, was there any finding or evidence of political motivation here, you said no.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And so what we find is a situation where inexcusable activity took place because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily. And if there's a place in public service where you have to have the highest level of conduct and standards, it's at the IRS. And so, Mr. Miller, I think it's unfortunate for those who are in positions of authority, but the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think that's exactly what we're saying. That should not diminish the good work that has been done by anyone within the IRS over the years. And so I hope you understand that you are here today talking to us because we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to clean up and clear out so we can go back to the business of making sure that people respect the fact that we have a voluntary system of paying our taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I want to talk a little.
I thought that would be a good spot to stop at because he basically admits a voluntary system to pay our taxes. Ed, take it away.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight again. we are about education. We are not sitting here trying to explain to people how to live their life, to control their life, or to exist in their life. Our point is to educate ourselves so that way we know how to defend ourselves in life. Because of these domestic terrorists we have by elected and public servants. And as soon as people start comprehending that these are elected and public servants and they're not gods, they are not people of major authority or have any authority, most don't have authority at all because they're not licensed and bonded. And when they're not licensed and bonded, they literally have no authority whatsoever. And so when people start putting these things together and start realizing this, because the one topic I'm going to get into tonight is dealing with taxes as well, is license, bond, and insurance by elected and public servants. And I do recommend if you ever pay anything to the system, make sure that you go in with a 1099 form. Make sure you write it and ask them to stamp them if they will. And if they stamp it, that would be really cool, because if they stamp it, you have the evidence for them to file with the IRS. And if they don't file with the IRS, oh, what does that mean? The IRS will go after them. That's the one thing that people have to realize, that the IRS will go after these type of people. This is not a joke. See, we've got to utilize our elected and public servants the way it's been designed to work for us. And everybody will get off on these tangents going, well, they don't have this right or that right to do this to me. Well, we know that point, but see, either you have to write your instruments to defend yourself and to prosecute them. The one thing is looking how to go after them for lawsuits. And that's the one thing that affects the tax structure of the county as well as your elected and public servants. You can file the criminal charges in your lawsuits, and that's advisable, because you always want to make sure you have those structures in writing. And if you don't have them in writing, how is anybody supposed to defend yourself when you can't defend yourself unless you have it in writing? That is the one point that you people have got to start comprehending, that this is real on how to go after them. And we do have it up on the website, new.org, and trackers, how to sue a judge and how to sue a cop. And so this way, the thing is putting this stuff together so this way you are responsible for your actions to go after them. Because if you don't go after them, nobody else is going to do anything for you unless you do it yourself. I go after religion, but what is praying going to do unless that you start putting the structure in movement? You can have all the faith you want, but you have to have faith in yourself first. Once you have faith in yourself to accomplish things, then this way, once you have that faith, you can start maneuvering. But until you have that faith amongst yourself, you're beating yourself before you even get started. And that's where most people don't comprehend how that really works. Because, psychological depression does take advantage. Does go after yourself mentally on things. It really does work that way. And so when people start realizing that when they have a standing ground to go after these men and women, then that way you can sit there and go after them and defend yourself. And that's where people need to start doing this stuff, is standing up for themselves. And I like to say that I am proud, because I've seen a lot of people starting to get it. I talk to a lot of people giving information, and then we have to do that and go after them personally. I got to deal with vaccinations in a state that we got to put that letter together this week to go after the attorneys to have them prove their liability. And we want their license to practice law. We know that these men and women don't have a license to practice law. But you have to put this stuff in administrative writing. your administrative writing. Let's clarify. It's your administrative writing. And if you don't put your administrative writing for yourself intact, because I'm not talking administrative for the government, elected and public servants, because we are the government when it really comes down to it. And that's the one thing that you have to realize. And so many people sit there and go after on these points of view that will say, well, I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. They're supposed to do it. Well, you have to realize that I don't know where you comprehend that they have to do so much. They're supposed to do stuff, but they haven't done anything protecting people's rights. And we're realizing that more and more each day. And then with executive orders that Donald Trump has been passing, yes, use those executive orders. Those executive orders apply to elected and public servants. They don't apply to we the Americans. And it is knowing what the capital C and the lower C means, claiming that you are lawful or legal. And that is the one thing that people have got to start standing up for their rights. And a lot of men and women are standing up for their rights, but doing it as correctly is the main point, is doing it to be correct. And so that's the one thing that we like to get the research out that we do, so that way you can read the structures of how to do it to the correctness or the best of the ability. And it's the best of the ability to you, to what goes on with you around your life. And once you comprehend these things, and you start doing this, you start seeing things moving. I was talking to an individual where a case is starting to move, and the individual is finally starting to get how to do stuff, but sometimes it takes a while for people to comprehend these things. I do get this. But, I mean, when you get rutted in, don't get rutted in. Start standing up and fighting. Because the minute you get rutted in, you're not going to accomplish anything. And that is the structure on that. That you cannot get rutted in. Because once you start getting rutted in, you're not going to get anywhere. And so it is one of those things that bringing these to the forefront on these things. Because, see, if we don't bring it up to the forefront, who else is going to bring it up to the forefront? That's why we do this talk show, to bring a lot of the evidence of what's going on with our elected and public servants. Because people need to know this stuff. And so when you're starting to stand up for yourself, you start getting spirit in you. You start getting spite in you. You can start seeing the other side of the hillside. Because you know that on the other side of that hillside or mountain, it's going to work. But that comes from you. That really comes from you. And so when it starts standing up for yourself, you know, you're going to start realizing that you have strength in yourself. You're going to start realizing that you have faith in yourself. And that's where the faith needs to really start coming in, yourself too as well. Whatever your faith may be, but you have to have faith in yourself. Because if you don't have faith in yourself, what are you going to accomplish? See, these are things that people have got to start preparing and start putting together and bringing this stuff together, because it is your structure. It's like dealing with the natives. I've been watching some of these videos where, you know, it's interesting with Obama coming out and one of his speeches he did a while back ago, which I thought was quite intriguing. You know, talking about, well, if you're not native Indian, you have no rights in this country, and we're all immigrants that came to this country. Well, technically, that is not true whatsoever, because there's been a lot of people, a lot of races that have been here beside the native Indians. And it's not race, it's color. And as soon as you realize that the Constitution does not discriminate against color, racism is technically, if you do the legal research, is on religion. That's what the thing is about racism, is on religion. not the color of the race that the Democrats have got us and the Republicans have got us fighting on these things. So that way they can sit there and make their dollars off of the incrimination of their system going back against us, because they're making their own system so that way they can sit there and do this stuff for their own personal and financial gain. And you got to remember, this is how these men and women, what they call legally, are able to rob, commit piracy. And the only way that they're able to get away with committing piracy is by the people not defending themselves. Or so many people will go in and just say, oh, I'm just going to go pay this ticket because I don't want to deal with it. Well, the minute you start paying those tickets, they've got you in the computer. They know that you are a money bank. And these men and women know this stuff. And see, once you start comprehending that these men and women know this stuff, and they utilize this for their own personal and financial gain, and most of us are getting that more now today than we did in the past. But this is the one thing dealing with taxes. It's like I'm getting ready to start putting out my letter dealing with property taxes. I could prove by administrative rules in federal and Supreme Court cases that property taxes are voluntary. And so I've already emailed some stuff to the local media here because I figure if worse comes to worse, I'm getting ready to go do this and prepared. I'm prepared for what might, come down. But I have no choice in the matter because being disabled, I don't have these resources that they want me to pay. That's the one thing that I don't have the income to pay their debts. And I've been after them to prove the law, saying where it is that I have to pay this stuff. Where the law says. I get a lot of people out there that say, what's going on? What's going on right now? What's going on in our system? What is happening? That is the main point. And I get this point where people try to say, well, tribal law says this and tribal law says that. But when you are in jail, when you are in jail, the point being on that one is very, very simple. Who are you going to defend? Who are you going to call? It's like when the last time I was kidnapped and held for ransom, it took a long time for me to get a phone call, to be allowed to use the phone. And they're sitting there telling me that, phone calls is only in TV. It doesn't exist. We don't have to allow you to have contact with anybody in the outside world while we're kidnapping and holding you for ransom. And that is a scary part, because when I was in there, I was having heart issues. And that was the other thing that got to me about it, because I'm eating nitroglycerin like crazy, candy suckers. And they knew it, but they were hoping that I would die in jail so that way they could cover their tracks. And they do this. They do this. They do this to people all the time. And that is the frustration that we live in this society. And society is a British terminology. And see, when we start knowing where these words come from, how they are dealt with, who controls the words, who made up the words. Because, it's like the dictionary terms. You always see the dictionary terms change. They always change. And they're like law degrees. They change. And so when you do this stuff and start not paying attention to how the degrees of these things change, how they use their terminology to collect income from you. Because if you and I went out and, started billing people illegally or doing what they call a pyramid scheme like our elected and public employees are doing, this is the saddest part we're living. Because the thing is that when these elected and public servants do this to us, And so it is the structure that we are living in this country, territory, and even country and territory. I've done the research, and territory is what they're calling of the old structure, going back to the English treaties. And remember, we have British treaties with these men and women. Your original constitution from your home, or land, or soil, preferably soil, because that way if you say land, that's what they use in their corporation. But by our land rights, you have to file for your land rights. You have to make sure that you are filing and for them to prove that either you are or not. And that is the point that you have to do, is file on these things to make sure that you have rights. And also, too, to know if you're lawful or legal in this country. People say, well, that doesn't mean anything. Well, yes, it does. Because if you're lawful in this country, the 48 states, the States United, if you are lawful, you have rights, not privileges. And that is the point of determining what a right is compared to a privilege. And so once you start comprehending these things of a right compared to a privilege, then people will start paying attention more and more to what we have to do to defend our country, our 48 states, and the people around us. So if we don't start defending more and more than what's going on, we have a big chance of losing this country to like Pelosi and all these people. I always find it interesting, for example, like Nancy Pelosi. It was interesting because all of a sudden, when her husband gets a $1 billion contract for doing the railroad system from L.A. to San Francisco, and yet people are going to say, well, what do you mean? Well, she got an interesting contract out of that deal because she was a senator, and they're going to say, well, that was not misappropriated. To me, that's misappropriated to me. Because how do you sit there and get a $1 billion contract? And that's simple, a $1 billion contract for nothing. And they're billing it off to the taxpayers, what they're claiming. But see, the thing is under the HR 192 Act, it's already prepaid. So and once you start doing that, and you always put that evidence into this stuff about being prepaid, and you ask people very bluntly about this stuff, and that is the main point, that you have to start speaking up. You have to start standing up. And that is the main point of knowing what's lawful and what's legal. And once people start comprehending the lawful and legal structure, it makes it so much easier for you to exist. It makes it so much easier so you know you're standing. Because when you go to court, beside the flags that they do in that the courtroom, you have to know you're standing. And that's the one thing that people do not comprehend, you're standing with that. What a standing is. What is a standing? Knowing you're standing, knowing if you're a large C citizen or a small C citizen. Knowing if you're a lawful American or legal American, and people say, well, there's no difference in that. And I've had many people try to argue with me on that. And then I prove it to them. And then when you prove it to them, oh my God, they sit there and they want to argue more. That is a frustration that I have with people. I really have some frustration with people who want to argue on things like that instead of sitting there and defending themselves, educating those around them. And so when it comes down to taxes, it's voluntary. It's been proven. We know this. That's like we got a New Hampshire Superior Court case that says sheriffs are voluntary. You know, that's the one thing that's voluntary. And so that's the main point. Your system is a voluntary system. How are you supposed to stand up? How are you supposed to defend yourself? Well, knowing who has right and wrong points of view, knowing who is right to stand up, compared to who is wrong to stand up. And the main thing is, remember that elected and public servants, okay, they don't have authority unless there is an actual crime. There has to be an injured man or woman and or child for you to go after them. If there's no injury, there's no crime. And that is the main point, that people do not comprehend that point with dealing with crime. And that, to me, is so sad, because when it comes to putting your instruments together, you have to be thinking these things through. You have to know what you're putting together. And because you are liable for your actions. That is the one thing that people have got to start comprehending, that you are liable for your actions. And once you start accepting the facts that you are liable for your actions, because everybody says, well, I don't want to be liable and it's not my issue. Well, once you start standing up for your issue and protecting your bloodline, and I believe me, and I bring this up all the time, people will tell me, well, Ed, your bloodline has nothing to do with anything. There is no such thing as bloodline. Well, I hate to differ with those people who do not quite comprehend life, because your bloodline, when a man and woman mate, you create bloodline. You create a structure that is sitting there protecting your ancestry. Lawful or immigrant, either way, you're protecting the industry of your family. And I'm using the word industry. I don't like using that word because that's a commercial industry. That's the way industry is designed under commercial structure. But we want to get away from that. We want to make sure that people file their rights. And see, that is the one thing that people have to sit there and do this and file for your rights. You have to make sure that you know who's lawful and legal. You, your family. I ask people all the time, do you know how far your family goes back on this soil? On this soil. Because once you know how far back you are going on this soil, then you know that you have rights, not privileges. And pre-bred animals is referred to their bloodline. So yes, that is a good point. That all animals, like your show dogs, your show cats, and all that stuff, you know, yes, it does go with a bloodline. That is the point on it. It does. It has to go by bloodline. So when you're sitting there with a dog in the structure of the life, hey, you can't sell a dog unless the dog has papers of a bloodline. Well, you can sell mutts or give mutts away, and I've had many mutts that I've done this and done that, and so it's like, you know, I never gone out and paid for a dog or a cat. I always got it from somebody else. And the one animal that I prefer is pit bulls. You know, people say, oh, pit bulls. Pit bulls are scary. And it's like, that's the one thing, that you can't be afraid of something you don't know. And a lot of people are afraid of stuff they don't know. They get terrified of things, even their own shadow. Oh, that's a good point, too. Even racehorses are designed on bloodline. Say, that's the main thing. You cannot buy a racehorse without a bloodline. You could run a stag or whatever you want to call them, but that's the one thing that, when it comes to horse racing, you have to have pure bloodline, especially to put them in the derbies. Because without pure bloodline, they're not authorized to be in the derbies. And it does make the difference. And this is where people don't realize that your bloodline, your children, your standing means a heck of a lot. So when you're sitting there doing this for your children and protecting your children and yourself, and that means when you go to these kangaroo courts, these Article I courts that are foreign government, not American. And that is the one thing that people have got to come to the conclusion and the comprehension that the structure that goes on with these things are not real. It's like a Disneyland movie. And that's the one thing that people have got to comprehend what Disney is all about, fantasy. When do people stop living in fantasy? Too many people want to live in fantasy instead of reality because fantasy is easier to cope with than reality. And we all comprehend that reality. See, that is the one point that, once we start getting over the hurdles and we start realizing that taxes and comprehend that our taxes are a voluntary system, and then once you start realizing your system is voluntary, and you start comprehending that the whole structure is like the new gun laws that they keep coming out with, or administrative rules. That's what they are, administrative rules. Those gun laws that they call only apply to elected and public servants, registered church members, and that is the whole structure. Registered church members, registered voters, elected and public servants. And that is the point, that you don't comprehend how these things work like this. Or if you do, then the whole point is to start standing up on this stuff. Because once we start putting these things together, and we start making sure that all this stuff is publicly done, so we do not sit there and fight and argue, go through these terminologies of the court administrative rules, or what these other people are writing, their own administrative rules and their structure. You got to remember that these men and women create stuff for their employment and sometimes their enjoyment. And that is the one thing, is that you have to realize that when these men and women write these administrative rules, they don't care about you. They don't care about their own children. They don't think about that. They're writing them for their own financial gain. And that's where it comes down to, is their financial gain. And most people, they don't go to a job unless they're getting compensated for it, do they? One way or the other, if they're not being paid, debt notes. And with that Title 18411, you can't pay debt with a debt. So now these are the things that we need to question. These are the things that we need to bring up. I mean, this is the one thing that is getting so scary dealing with taxes. They're using what they call your tax funding when you go in and pay to educate the children on gay and lesbian structure. They're starting to do that in kindergarten. And it's mind control to put these kids in harm's way. It really is mind control. There's nothing more to say about it. It's mind control all the way. Because if you don't do what we say, we're going to take your kids out of school, we're going to punish them, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And this is sad because it does happen all the time. They want to punish us people for their structure. They want to punish us for their decisions. And they can't punish us for their decisions. Because the thing is that their decisions are not for we the people. Their decisions are for themselves, for their structure, for their payment. Good or bad, that is the one thing, good or bad for their payment. And so when people start comprehending how the system works compared to what they're interpreting it, because most people interpret stuff. We get taught to interpret just like the Bible, because when we go in, and I've done Bible studies, and it's like we get taught into interpreting what the Bible means, or what it means to us, what it says to us. So now is the point that we have to look at this point of how it means, like property taxes, income tax, federal income tax. It's like always ask them, where's the law? Where's the law? Prove the law. And that's what you want people to do, is prove the law. And that is the one thing, that there is no law to pay income taxes. There is no actual law to pay property taxes. I get this all the time for the clerk right now, and she sent me administrative rules that says that this has to be paid. Well, where's the law? And she's arguing with me, and I'm going back and forth with her right now on some issues, and she's arguing with me going, this is the law. And I'm like, no, that's administrative rules, and I can prove it. And she goes, well, it doesn't matter. You have to abide by them. I don't have to abide by your corporation administrative fantasy. That's what gets to me. People want to argue these wrong structures. How that you don't have a right. Well, I go by a native structure. I don't go by foreign religion, but even by foreign religion, it says that your land is supposed to be yours, and then people say with the Magna Carta, that changed. The Magna Carta, at that point, made it legal system. And so when the system became legal, remember, legal means British foreign government. It is not of we the people. It has nothing to do with we the people. And that is the one thing that people have got to start standing up on their rights and standing and protecting their neighbor. That's the one thing that people don't do today. Most people don't know their neighbor. Most people don't know what's going on in their communities. Most people are so buried with their head in the TV system or foreign games, you know, football, baseball. All these things started to make our lives somewhat easier, I guess, for entertainment purposes, to kill the day or the evening or whatever by. But then again, what effect does it have with us, for us, against us, with us? See, these are things that are questions that need to be brought up that people need to really think about. And so once people start thinking about this structure and start applying it to their taxes, because we've got the tax codes up there, and the one thing is that I will read a part, because we know the 16th Amendment was never ratified. And that was proven in Congress in 1963. And we put the videos out on this stuff, and there's more than one video out on this stuff. There is definitely more than one video out on property taxes, income taxes, or voluntary. Like Ronald Reagan once said, well, taxes, everybody has to pay taxes. Well, Ronald Reagan was a corporate man. Remember, don't forget he was an actor. So, but then again, he brought out and spoke favorably on men and women to own their rights to have arms. And he could personally speak about that because he was actually shot. And so he agreed with that, and after he was shot, he started carrying a .38. And people don't realize that, you know, he really started carrying a sidearm after that point. And so when we go through these things, that we go through the traumas and these things that happen to us, this is the one thing that when you sit there and do this stuff and protect your bloodline, protect your children, protect them from taxes, protect them from invasion of different things, and that is invasion of elected and public servants. And you have to realize your teachers, they don't work for you. Your teachers are basically said that they're on the tax structure. You're on the rolls. The people say, well, your property taxes goes to pay the schools. No, they don't. Once you start realizing that your property taxes doesn't apply or pay what you think it does, because they write most of the stuff off on House Resolution 192, and we do have a certified copy of that from Legislative Council. Legislative Council on our site. You know, I mean, that is the one point that Legislative Council has even stated this stuff. So when we go by their structure of the truth of Legislative Council, by your elected and public employees that said this, that brought it out, and here's the other valid point too. Look at the Queen of England. If you're not because of what they call the royal bloodline, of course the Queen was not technically of the so-called royal bloodline, but she was a third cousin that got in, but that's the same thing. You have a royal bloodline. And people say, well, that doesn't matter. The bloodline in your country territory matters. Once you comprehend that your bloodline actually matters, and it actually means something, so that way you know that when you created that child in love, the government didn't create that child. You created that child. See, once that child was created by the Great Spirit and Mother Earth, how do you think these things happen? That is the one point that people have got to start stepping back and looking at the movie and paying attention. Like I said, I always recommend Interstate 60, the movie. It explains your court system. It really does. And once you start realizing your court system is a fraud, like a lot of us have realized this, we don't want to participate. We know that they'll send armed men and women out to kidnap you, to assault you, even to temporarily, try to take your life. These men and women do this stuff. It's not a joke. But you have to file your paperwork before it even gets to that point. You have to separate yourself and get off the tax rolls. Once you get off the tax rolls, then you've got a major standing and you got your income. You have survival. And that is the one thing that you want, is to have your assets and your survival techniques in place. And it's like, this is one thing we do put in our instruments, and I tell everybody to put this in their instruments. Every state must conform in the first place to the Constitution of the United States and their subordinate constitutions of the particular state. So that means that your Constitution state, when it was founded, you have to go by that. That was by the decision that was made in Houston versus Moore, 18 U.S. 1.5 LED 19, and that was done in 1840. That was even before the 14th Amendment was administratively passed. Any of that stuff was structurally set up. So they had to go by that, and then it was redone. And they said at their own extension, it has to do with Mate versus Ohio, 367 U.S. 643.659, and that was done in 1961. And then there's a newer case, Harris versus New York, United States Supreme Court, 401 U.S. 222, 1971. That says that your Constitution has to be applied by the original Constitution. And when we did our treaties with the British government before we were forced into their system, it said in the Constitution of every state you didn't have to pay income or property taxes. It was in the original constitutions. I do suggest people do the research and get the original constitutions, not the amended one that they put on the state sites. And the 16th Amendment was never ratified per Article 5 of the United States Constitution. Congressional Record, House, June 13, 1967, page 15641 through 15646. And the complete court case back then in 1968 was Dyke versus Turner. And this is the one thing that people have got to realize, that these things have been fought in court. They've been brought up in court. And so you have these evidence. And so when you don't file your income taxes, and, they're not going to come after you usually right away, but then when they come after you, if they come after you, now you have this evidence to produce, to bring into that structure. So you have to bring that evidence into the structure so that way you know what's going on. You have to be the responsible man or woman. And you have to be the responsible man or woman that educates your child on these issues. Because if you're not being responsible, how do you expect your children to be responsible? We go after and blame the kids for a lot of stuff, but remember, kids are not totally educated in these things. And they don't get educated unless we educate them. We are the men and women that have to be responsible to educate the children. And that is the main point. And don't forget the 10th Amendment of the Constitution applies this. It reserves the right to the state, capital S, to represent or to the people. So that's the one thing, if you do get a tax issue that they're coming after you for, hey, call your senator and House of Representatives, write them a letter, put them on the spot, and say, hey, now you have to be responsible to do your employment, your servitude. You're supposed to represent me. I'm going to court, represent me in court. That's if you are a citizen or a national. If you are a native, then you have to represent yourself. Unless you want to give your rights over to an attorney or somebody like that. But once you give your rights over to a foreign identity, you have no rights to say anything because you lost your rights. You lost your, then your rights become a privilege, and the court and the attorney gets to decide which direction they're going to go on. And that's the one thing that people have to comprehend, how these kangaroo court systems work. Because they do work this way. And this is not a joke when these court systems come after us and try to say that we owe this money. That's why I always suggest that you always ask them, put it in writing, get it certified. I mean, I've been had somebody drill that into my head, and I want to drill that into everybody else's head. I got off the phone with somebody earlier today that dealing with caseworkers, and the state of Oregon stated that they didn't have licenses to do business. The caseworkers, and they have to be licensed technically, and the way I heard it, there's only a few caseworkers actually licensed in the state of Oregon. Corporation state, only a few. So when this happens, when there's only a few that are licensed, you need to go after these men and women who are licensed. And you need to go after the ones that are not licensed and go after their bonds. And ask them to prove they got a bond. Most of them don't have a bond or insurance structure. And these men and women know they don't. But they're still going to do this work going after you to prove these things. They're going to go after you to sit there and make an income for themselves. Remember, these men and women don't care about you. And I've proven this more than once. Men and women, they don't care. You know, most of them, some of them don't even have care or compassion for their own children. They just bring them in this world and expect them to be this way. So the one thing is, hopefully, do we have Arizona number up there? Host?
I'm searching right now. Just give me a moment.
Because I wonder if Kawashu has joined us or not. Because he sent me a deal, and I want to make sure he gets on here. I want him to bring some of his stuff that he's been talking about, bring it into this structure so people comprehend about Native and what's going on. So if Kawashu, you're there, hit *6. Should bring you in.
Got a Nevada number and a California number, but no Arizona.
You got a Nevada number? Click on the Nevada number.
Okay, let's see. All right.
Are you there?
Nevada.
Hey, Kawashu, how you doing?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for all the work you do, Ed.
I'm thankful that you're joining us, and I want you to get into some of your case.
Well, I have several.
Well, I know. I want you to get in because you are proven native beyond a shadow of a doubt. So I want to make sure that people comprehend lawful and legal. And why don't you bring up where you started having your issues with them standing up for your not only treaty rights but your rights on this soil that even goes back to the Constitution and administrative rules.
Well, basically, it started out with my very first federal case versus me. I went out and I was picking my people's traditional plant, which is the tule and the cattail plant that really nobody cares about. Anyway, I was out picking the plant to do a demonstration for an elementary class. When I do a demonstration, I make a few duck decoys and I have some plant material for the kids to touch and feel and experience with their own hands. So I got invited to do an elementary school demonstration, so I went out, picked some plants, picked a couple of bundles, enough for 2 duck decoys and some extra material, but I just so happened to be on a so-called federal game refuge in Nevada, which was right next to the Indian reservation where I live, and which was basically about 5 miles from my doorstep. So anyway, the so-called game warden, federal game warden, I asked him, do you know who I am? Do you know what I'm doing? And then he said yes, and then he turns around and does about an hour investigation on me and ran me through his deal, and he was talking to his superiors. And after an hour, he decides to cite me and threaten me with arrest and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's when I first started to learn law and standing up. I really didn't know what I was doing a lot, not like I do now, but basically they were charging me for picking a plant or an animal. Their so-called federal charges, and then my other charges were trespassing / being in an unauthorized area. And the very first thing I did was I went to my own people from the tribe where I grew up on, and I asked them for help. I said, I'm going to stand up for my rights, and it affects all Indians, especially our people here that live next to this so-called federal wildlife refuge. And I said, if you guys can help me, I'll accept anything, whether it's a few dollars or advice or legal help, lawful help, whatever you call it. But the thing about it is they turned me down. They said, you're on your own. And I found out why a little bit later, and it's because these tribes, it's a long story, but to try to make my story short, is all these federal recognized tribes, in order to be a tribal member, the Indian has to obtain and produce and provide a birth certificate and a social security number in order to be a member of a tribe, which is a huge red flag, but nobody pays attention to that. But besides that, this tribe, they were against all of my traditional activities anyway, because I was living just like a regular Indian ever since I was 13 years old. I learned a lot of the traditional ways from my people, and I'm one of the last traditional people who I come from, and everything we do does not require a license, permit, authorization from anybody except for the Great Spirit. But everything is supposed to be illegal, unlawful, all that kind of stuff if you don't have these permits and licensing. So to have control over the people, these tribes are now compromising. They're basically surrendering under the state, and of course they're under America, the federal corporation of America, and which basically lives the doctrine of discovery and the laws of admiralty on land. So that's another big story. But the basic thing is, the basis of what I'm trying to talk about is that I had to learn the hard way, and I had to learn, and I'm glad I did, because I learned how, there's a difference in Indians today. Today's, you look at all Indians, and the majority of the people, whether it's a lawman, judge, or somebody that never heard of Indians, they think Indians are extinct in history. They don't exist anymore. And then when they do see an Indian, they think that he's a drunk and he's uneducated and unemployed and whatever, domestic dependent, because most are. But besides that, today's Indians that are documented and statutory, they got, which means that they're under the state and they're under the United States. And the majority of the Indians today are incorporated. Same thing as a business, DBA, doing business as. So that's the majority of the Indians today, and there's very few that are traditional, which means they don't want to have no part in America. They don't want nothing to do with the state. They don't want nothing to do with commerce and commercial laws and all that other stuff. It's all about living, just like I said, everything I was taught growing up. I couldn't wait to become a man when I was a teenager so I could do the things that I was taught to do. And I lived a great life doing those types of things and still working and, fitting in with modernization. But I've always held on to my culture. But that when I got challenged by the United States Federal Wildlife Service, that really gave me a good experience, because I knew I was right and I knew they were wrong, and I had to prove it. But I didn't know law back then, but I did stand up for myself, and I did win my case. And with the help of Dave Buse and Ed and Joanne Spotted Bear, and there's a handful of people that gave me some advice and help and aid into relearning and rethinking things, I was able to come out on top on that case. But one of the best things of all was when my own people turned me down where I lived and grew up, like I said, on this federal recognized tribe. I met some real Indians, which were the lead traditional tribal judge was from Alaska. His name's Rudy Shane. Right now he's about 87 years old, and he's still standing for Indian rights. But they taught me about traditional tribal law. Traditional tribal law is almost similar to common law. The only thing different between a traditional tribal court is we use all of the laws, from universal law to federal laws, international laws, and especially treaties. So in a traditional tribal court, we have between 3 and 15 Indian judges that are appointed, and they make a ruling, they do a declaratory judgment, and that's actually the supreme law of the land. So when my people from the area where I grew up on, they turned me down, they told me I'm on my own. The lead judge, when he heard about me and we talked, he said, "Get your family up to Tacoma, Washington, and we'll set you up a court proceeding in the traditional tribal court immediately." So I drove my family from Nevada all the way up into Tacoma, Washington, and of course, they were on my side, and they used the laws and gave me a really nice, strong declaratory judgment in my favor. And we actually beat the federal court. And the funniest thing is they ignored it, but still it doesn't matter because I won my case. But then, on the other hand, I learned traditional tribal law. So that started it all. And as of today, it's even more huge as far as knowing the difference between admiralty law, the laws of the sea, / Vatican, British rule, Crown rule, that surrounds us daily, what they call America, as to the laws of the land, which is the original Constitution, which is peace treaties. That's the thing about the Indian treaties is the Indian treaties they're still alive and valid today because the Indian treaties were peace agreements between nations. So the Indians have always upheld their promise to not war anymore. And the crazy part about America is America lives and thrives off of wars. They even make up wars to be able to continue warring with something or somebody. But when it comes to treaties, like I said, from the East Ocean all the way across to the West Ocean, from the Southern Ocean all the way past Canada, every Indian tribe or Indian nation that has a treaty, that peace agreement, they've always kept peace. There's no such thing as an Indian nation that has banks that steal people's homes. There's no such thing as an Indian nation that has armies that kill others. There's no such thing as any Indian nation that jails people and kills people and murders people and all that other kind of stuff, because peace treaties are peace, which is life. So that's the good part of how Indian treaties are still valid and alive, because the Indian treaty is what started the Constitution and what lives the Constitution. So wherever I go, I do support the original Constitution, because just like in Article 6, Clause 2, basically states the treaties are the supreme law of the land. So that's why today's Indians, they need to relearn. And matter of fact, in my life, I gave back my Social Security number because I don't want to be owned. I don't want to claim on myself. I gave back my Social Security number because the same thing. I don't want to be a number, and I don't want to give any authority to any foreign entity or corporation. And I also had to give back my federally recognized tribal identification and membership. I terminated that forever because I don't want to belong to any tribes that are de facto / corporate tribes. And right now I'm the only treaty Indian in the state of Nevada, because in order to be a treaty Indian / a sovereign from a sovereign nation, you can't belong to anything else. So I had to give all that stuff back to get to be where I am today and to be able to stand in that knowledge that I've accumulated so far. So that's, like I said, my very first case was the federal case. And when I won my case in that federal court, with some of the tips of our people, our good people out there, that I mentioned earlier, one of the things I did was I asked, first I called and then I turned around and faxed them a notice. I gave that federal court a notification that I want a certified, notarized copy of my case, saying that we're done and over with and it's closed in history. So I had to pay a $30-something fee for it, which I didn't care because I actually got their sealed certification that that case was done and over with. Then I turned around and stuck that my certified notarized copy of that case, United States of America versus me, into Nevada museums. I basically told the museum people, I said, if I was to rob a bank today, I would be known in Nevada history as an Indian bank robber. And it doesn't matter if I don't like the story 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Whatever we do today, it's going to be that way forever. So I told them I'm an Indian, which you guys know. I've been standing up for myself, and I know my traditional ways. And this was actually a huge embarrassment on the United States federal wildlife system. But anyway, I gave them my court papers, which was probably about 30 pages. Their creation, which means their writings, just like it was said before, anytime you put something on a piece of paper, it's a form of art, whether it's numbers, letters, colors, shapes, whatever. First, you got a plain sheet of paper which has nothing. Then whatever you put on that paper turns into a form of art. So that very first citation was their form of art in my eyes. It was their creation. Whether if I lost, I would be spending time in jail or prison or paying a fine. So that was their creation. Well, when I went into the federal court and I won my case, I got their creation again, saying that the case is closed and ended. So I took their creation, not mine. I didn't write nothing on there. And then I turned around and put it in the museum for several reasons. One was it's a form of a publication, which means I have nothing to hide. I don't have nothing to be ashamed of. It's just their documentation. So if nobody wants to believe me, I'll just say, well, go to the two museums and ask to look in their archives, and you'll see it. And black ink on white paper, their creation. So basically, that's one of the things that I learned, and that was my first case I won. And the second one was a driver's license case where two county deputies pulled me over because one of my lights was flickering on my truck. I didn't have insurance on my truck. I didn't have a driver's license because then I learned about the driver's license, how it's a fraud document, fraud contract. So I told these two deputies, I said, I don't have a driver's license, and I'm not going to get one, and nobody can force me to. And they were going to arrest me, but I told them, why don't you just give me a ticket? And I said, I know some law by now, and I said, I'll gladly go to your court, and I'm sure I'll win. When I said that, they were laughing. They were really laughing. They thought I was being funny, but I was pretty serious. So anyway, to make my story short, I gave the court notification of some laws and my status. That's when I learned how to change my status as from being a citizen to a original man / Indian. And when I went to that court on my driver's license case, it was $1,000 in fine. No driver's license, no insurance. One of my lights was out. As soon as I got there, I was ready to start talking, and I heard dismissed. And it was pretty amazing because I was only in there for 2 minutes, and when I looked up at the guy in the black robe, he said, "You're done." So I walked out of there, and I did the same thing. As soon as the next day, I produced a document, and I told the court clerk I want a certified notarized copy of this case saying that we're done and over with and case closed and it's over. And they gave it to me. But I asked them to mail it to me because I wanted them to use the United States Postal Union, the UPU, the post office. I wanted them to use the mail to transport their document, their creation, to me. So I basically did the same thing. I put that in 2 museums as a form of a publication, and I want it to be protected. And then I got challenged by a Nevada state game warden who charged me for unlawfully killing antelopes and no tags and all this kind of stuff. That's still going on. So, like I said, the more I wanted to just live my peaceful life as an Indian, the more it started to get more complicating, and these challenges just keep getting, piling up. Because when I talk to officers, even black robe and agents, they don't understand that the Indians were issued, just like all of us, when we were born. When we were born, we didn't have a choice to accept the birth certificate and the Social Security number. And the majority of our parents had no idea what that was. And today's Indians, they have no idea what it is to be from a federally recognized tribe. Recognition, being a federal recognized Indian, the word recognized, that doesn't mean the same thing as being honored. Recognized means we see you with long hair or black hair or blue eyes, and who cares what your name is? Who cares what your age is? It doesn't matter if you're a mother, son, father, uncle. It doesn't matter. We recognize you. That's it. That's what corporate America has done to the Indians, is they just recognize them. So that's why in 1933 was the United States, one of their bankruptcies. They've been bankrupt many times for many reasons. It's not just about money. Anyway, that's another story. But basically, the American people were basically given citizenship. Well, in 1934 was the IRA, the Indian Reorganization Act, where the Indians they really weren't citizens. They were sovereign people, but the great plan was to make them citizens too, for several reasons. So in 1934 was the Indian Reorganization Act that turned the Indians into citizens, which was the birth of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is a subdivision, political subdivision, to basically surrender all Indian treaties, all Indian rights to be incorporated. So the Indian tribes are the same thing as a business. They make money, they receive money, then they spend money. And they're worth money. So if I was to go to a tribal Indian clinic today, if I have a fever or whatever, and go see the tribal doctor, as soon as I sign my name on their document, same thing in the world of commerce. Everybody gets paid. Everybody gets paid for me just to go walking into that clinic, except for me, because they're doing business. They're using the Social Security and they're using the birth certificate just like everybody else. And since I disenrolled myself, I don't go to no doctors anymore. I can't sign up for welfare. I can't sign up for food stamps. Even if I wanted to try to get a state driver's license, I can't do it. I'm not in the system no more. So it's actually a good thing, but then I got to keep myself healthy and away from going into any types of hospitals and all that. But it's been a pretty good path, because as of today, I'm able to talk, not yell, scream, shout at officers and agents and even the black robe, and they seem to get it. They seem to like it also. I had a little confrontation with or a visit, whatever you want to call it, with a guy calling himself a federal officer, Bureau of Land Management officer, yesterday, and we talked for about 15 minutes. He tried to tell me his policies. He tried to tell me his laws and in his handbook, and I had to reschool him at that moment to tell him that, well, that was back then. Things have changed. See, the catch is that the Indians of 50 years ago, they really didn't think about relearning what was told and what was given to them. I have a lot of respect for a federal international postal judge named David Wynn Miller. I actually talked with him several times, and he's got a really good quote, and I quote it several times, and he basically says, "What you think you know, you never knew, and what you thought you know, you don't know," because right now, in the now time, we're living in the land of illusion. We're not really living in the land of illusion, but it's around us. The majority of the people are in the land of illusion and magic and witchcraft, and it's really crazy. But when you get to the reality, that's where peace lives. That's where fact is a fact, and the facts of law exclude color of law. So I had a big discussion with this guy about color of law. I even mentioned to him about his color of uniform. I said, you're wearing a color of a uniform. It's brown. I said, there's other officers that wear black. There's other guys that wear blue and green. I said, yours is brown. Your color of uniform right at this time is the same color as earth. I even told him it's the same color as my skin, brown. But it was kind of funny because he actually liked the stuff that I was talking about, and we laughed, and we, like I said, he tried to keep his law book on top of things, but I had to put it down many times because the only way I could agree with his laws and his law book is if I had full faith in whatever he said. And I'm past that now, today, as of today, because I won't consent. I'll have to do my own research, which I've done, and everything that has been placed on our people as far as commercial activity, doing business as, it's only by your consent. So I told him I'm never going to get a driver's license. I'm never going to get a wood permit. I'm never going to get a hunting license. And guess what? If you're a real federal officer, you need to honor what I'm talking about, and you're actually supposed to be defending everything I'm talking about as a federal officer, federal of the Republic. So anyway, like I said, it's really great. I feel really good about it, and I just wish my Indian people would wake up and change from just listening to something which you hear on TV or the radio, or hearing somebody talking that really don't know what they're talking about, and getting back into the reality like Ed talks about all the time, because the reality is living. It's not assuming, presuming. Even a judge, a guy in a black robe, he gives him his opinion. And the majority of the time, he's wrong. Because he's so used to fiction world. So that's why I said earlier that the Indians are lost today, and they are domestic and they are dependent, and there's just going to be a few that actually survive and make it. Because today, I've told a lot of Indians different things. One of the examples I've said, and it kind of goes for anybody else. If you take a drive out in the country, you'll see a range cow. The range cow, he might walk 5 miles just to drink some water in a spring or a creek. Then he'll walk 10 miles just to feed along, and or 20 miles. And he'll do that the next day or whatever. But today's people, they just walk to the sink and get a drink of water. Anyway, when it comes to the cow situation, then you get closer to the city, and then you'll see cows in a pasture, maybe a 40-acre field. And, you know, they got a fence. There are little areas within that 40-acre field or so. Then you get closer to the city, then you see a cow in a pen. Well, the cow in the pen, he's getting closer and closer to the city because he's getting closer and closer for the slaughterhouse. And that's where the Indians have been also. They were free at once, then they got put on reservations, which would be considered as a pasture. Well, now we're bunched up. And the Indians that are not learning anything, there's drugs that plague every single reservation. There's alcohol, there's corruption, everything's bad. The Indian reservations are not really safe no more. They're not a safe place. But basically, nobody is really excelling. Every time an Indian tribe gets money, the corruption takes it all. And then the people that really need it, they're without. So that's why when it comes down to it, only the traditional people that know how to go out and pick wild onions when the wild onions are ready.
Excuse me a minute, Kawashu. Can we get, is that you doing static, or do we know who's doing static?
Well, it could be my phone. I got a cheap phone.
Okay, no problem.
That is Kawashu's
So anyway, I don't
phone.
want to talk too much, but that's basically what I'm doing.
Well, I want you to continue on this point because I want people to start comprehending the structure of native and lawful and the structure. You've hit your couple good points, but I want you to bring it up a little closer on the issue.
Well, the main thing right now is that somebody needs to uphold the original Constitution, and basically the laws of the sea, the Admiralty, can be null and void, and they could be ended at any time. It's really a nice thing if you've got a $50,000 vehicle and you want insurance on it to protect it. But in my case, I've got a 96 Dodge 2500, and it got dents, and if I damage it or something, I'm really not going to put a claim into the insurance. It's protect it or whatever. When it dies out, it's gone. So in the world of commerce, if you really want to be involved in that, that's your choice. But not everybody has to be forced. And just because I don't have a driver's license no more with the state, I actually have a federal international driver's license / navigational instrument through the treaty, which the state cannot ignore, and they can't dishonor. And if I go through a red stop sign and I end up hurting somebody, I'm accountable for everything I do. I can't get out of it. But I expect to. I've got a driver's license case coming up with a little city where I grew up, And that's coming up on Tuesday, and I expect to win it because I know the law. I shared a lot of things with that court already, and I don't want to be forced to contract, and I don't want to be forced to treason myself by complying and giving up and surrendering. I'm too far past all that. But that's my story. There's a lot of Indians that, they are in need, and they have to be accountable for what they do.
So let me ask you one question. How has it been on a journey trying to get others to open their eyes up?
Well, I learned how to sense people. Even my own people, they start looking at the ground and they start yawning. I could tell when somebody doesn't want to listen. But the majority of the Indians today, if I talk to 100 Indians in a room, there might be 5 that might give me some attention, but the rest don't want to. They don't want to lose their so-called benefits. So they're not going to stand up. They're just going to allow all this stuff to happen. So it's kind of it's really a waste of time. And a lot of my own people, they actually told me they're going to sit back and watch and see what happens to me. So I'm not mad or offended about anything. I know I got a job to do, and I just got to do it.
Yep, that's correct. But
it's
isn't it?
Going to be a handful of us all.
Say that again?
I think it's only going to be a handful of us, all of us.
Yeah.
I was stopped by a state trooper about three years ago. Anyway, after 2 minutes, 2 more troopers arrived. After 10 minutes, 5 more. After 45 minutes on the side of the road, they tried their best to arrest me. And I'm not bragging, but basically, after 45 minutes, there was about 15 of them, all with their lights on. And I never stepped foot out of my pickup. And I actually carry my paperwork with me wherever I go. So for that 45 minutes on the side of the highway, I wasn't yelling, screaming, and shouting, but I was actually schooling them all. There was 3 troopers on my passenger side. There was 3 troopers on the driver's side. And I was talking loud enough for everybody to hear, and the rest were in the back. But basically, I was telling them about how things are changing. Anyway, to make my story short, the sergeant, he comes up to my pickup after the 45 minutes, and then he says, "Well, you're free to go." And he goes, but he put his finger up, and he goes, "But if I catch you driving on the state highways, I'm going to arrest you myself." And then, everybody's eyes were kind of big, and I said, "Didn't you hear all the stuff I was talking about?" I said, "The state of Nevada does not own anything. The corporations cannot own anything." I said, "The only thing the state of Nevada can do to these so-called state highways, or the highways and the roads and the whatever, is paint the strips on the side of the road in the middle and clear the snow and the ice off, and that's all they can do. They don't own it." So then I backed up, drove through all the cop cars onto the so-called state highway, and I went home. And 3 troopers followed me until I got to an intersection where I turned off to the reservation, and then, they went to town. But a lot of it, I think it's a bluff. They want to know if you know what's the fact and the realities of it. And if you don't know, then, that's where the laws of piracy takes an effect. Just like in the high seas, the pirates are known for looking for a victim. When they see a ship, they go out and they either attack it or they take over that ship. and they hold the people hostage and for ransom. That's what I'm talking about the Admiralty. So these police officers and these cops that are just waiting and looking around for victims, that's what you call piracy, because that's what they're doing. They're not looking for people that need help. I mean, you see a lot of people broken down on the side of the road, and they're sitting there for a long time unless, you turn around and go back and help them, which I do myself. I'll turn around and go back and help, but if I can. But the majority of these police, they're looking for a victim. They're looking for somebody to seize their property and, like I said, the piracy laws.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know your rights and if you know the laws, then they have no jurisdiction and they have no cause. Just like David Wynn Miller made a good analogy. He told me about he was charged by a so-called police officer for going through a stop sign. So he went to court because the language that we use, language can either kill you or help you. So basically, he asked the police officer, we're on record and you admitted to perjury and lying and all that kind of stuff. And then he says, so can you tell me, is this your claim that I went through a stop sign? And the officer said, yes. And he said, I'm going to warn you, are you really going to stick to that? And the guy said, yeah. So then David Wynn Miller turned around and says, well, how could anybody go through a stop sign? How can anybody physically go through a stop sign? So he was using the language and words to get his point across. And basically, I heard somewhere up in Europe or wherever, they actually have punctuation on a stop sign, because the stop signs that we see today, they're basically symbols, S-T-O-P. But if you put a punctuation in the beginning or the end, a punctuation will make a statement or a fact out of it. But anyway, that's the importance of, learning proper language and paying attention to how we use the language. It could hurt you. It could trap you. I'm pretty sure I understand that in court already, but so far it's just basically been, they want to see if I know what I am, for one, as an original man of this land, or am I going to be a statutory citizen, which is a federally recognized Indian? So a federally recognized Indian / American Indian, American citizen, a citizen, that places them with the authority to rule me and regulate me, and I have to comply with that. But when it comes to the treaty status, gives the so-called Indians their sovereignty, because you can't sell sovereignty. You can't sell what you don't own. Nobody can sell it. But in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they surrendered their rights for commerce, and that's why the Indians are losing. Every time the Indian tries to do something, they lose, because they're under America, they're under the state, they're under. They have no sovereignty. Did I help you?
Oh, yeah. So how's the journey been through the education to get where you are today compared to you were a few years back?
Well, I'm really thankful for, like, this phone. I could listen in on you guys' your talk shows. I do my best to do my own research And all the things that I talk about, I actually talk with other Indian nations from. Like, matter of fact, when I needed help in Nevada, there wasn't anybody to help me in Nevada. I had zero. Because my people don't know. They didn't know. They had no idea about rights. All they knew was some guy wearing a badge and a gun is telling us we can't do this and we can't do that. And then they had some guy in a black robe with a golden cross telling them, oh, you're this, you're that, and you're not worthy. And that's all the Indians have ever heard where I come from. So they believe anything. Before Nevada was Nevada, one of the stories of my people's past was when the first settlers came through here, they were always looking for water. And so they'd ask the Indians, kind of like using sign language or whatever, where's the water? And because there was no good communication back then. Well, at first there was a lot of Indians that avoided the settlers. There was a lot of Indians that, ran away. Then there was a lot of them that would just remain still. But then there was a few that actually made friends with the settlers and kind of like helped them out. Because over in Nevada, if you don't have water, you don't live. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know the quality of water, you don't live either. So they made friends with the settlers, and actually they were too friendly because next thing you know it, the settlers wanted to stay. They didn't want to go all the way through Nevada and California to the so-called gold. So basically, the word Paiute is a fictional name, and that's what my people are named from. Paiute. Well, in our language, Pa means water. Ute means over there. My people are known as the Numa, N-U-M-U. That's our word for the Indian people. But the word Paiute came along with the beginning of the state of Nevada and these settlers coming through. So there's kind of a funny story about that, where when the settlers and the cavalry would talk to the Indians, that's the main question they always had is, where's the water? So the Indians would say, water's over there, water's over that way, water's over here. Well, the funny story about that is some of the Indians would say, the water's over there, and then they'd point towards California, but they'd say way over there, which means keep going, don't stop. Keep going till you hit the ocean. But anyway, that's one of our beginning stories of the word Paiute. It's really not who we are. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they acknowledge the Paiute, but they don't know who the Numa are. And I had to learn that, and it really makes sense as of, even more, ever more today. I've actually talked with other Indians, like I met up with some Navajo ladies, and I said, hey, what does Navajo mean in your language? And they actually got mad, these two little old ladies. They said, the word Navajo means horse thief. I said, who named you guys that? They said, the white people and the Spaniards. And their original name is Dene, D-I-N-E. That means the people. The Lakota, their real name is the Oyate. So everybody's got their original name from their original people, their original language. But when you do commerce, since basically we're in the world of commerce now, the word Paiute, the word Lakota, the word Navajo, that's the white man's name for them. It's a fictional name, just like Wesley is. And I'm going to be getting rid of that really soon, but anyway, that's another story. So, like I said, today, it's really great to have knowledge. It's great to learn more, but we could never forget about the past, because the past is what helps us be who we are, but it's up to us to, just like as of today, friend each other, help each other when we, and actually, I call it a corrective change. That's what I look forward to in this time from 1980 or whatever this is, 2018. It's a period of corrective change. And I've told that to the Indians also. I said, basically, if Trump has a meeting tomorrow and he says he wants all Indians at this meeting at 1 o'clock, well, a lot of the Indians are going to try to go there, and they're really not real. They're going to be turned away. So basically, the 1934 Indian Reorganization period turned the Indians into citizens. They also call that the self-determination period. So what I came up with is the 1934 self-determination period / Indian Reorganization period was back then, and right now in the now times, it's going to be the Indian termination period, because the Indians no longer know who they are. America says an Indian is an Indian because America basically gave them their approval. So the lost people, they really need to wake up. And it's just going to be a gradual, when that happens, then, it might be too late for a lot of people. So I'm only one Indian over here, but I'm doing my best.
No, you're doing a hell of a job. And that's the one thing that we are glad to have you tonight, too. So this way, it brings out another point of view to explain things more correctly than what people have their imaginations run.
Well, my life has been about experience.
Well, I agree with you on that one.
Me and Ed are brothers, and I really don't even know if he's bald-headed or kinky-haired or what. But we're brothers. I don't need a contract with Ed. I don't need to have a contract with anybody. If somebody doesn't want to be my friend, then, just don't call me and don't listen to me. But the thing about it is that, yes, we are going to all have a good meeting time and, support one another. And I think this is going to be our last chance. So I'm pretty thankful to Facebook and YouTube and all these other things, the tools that we have to actually learn a little bit more. And I did a little video yesterday. It was a practice, and I can't believe it. We've got over 300 and something, almost 400 shares just in 24 hours.
Yep.
But there's a lot of comments and a lot of likes, but, it's not about showing off. It's about, I could write things on a piece of paper, or I could write something, but when you actually see somebody, like I was out in the country talking about my little experience with the officer, and I wasn't using the F word. I wasn't screaming and bad-mouthing anybody, because I do want to have a meeting, and I told him that. I said, I hope you come to this meeting the next time I come to your office, because I was in the BLM office in Carson City, Nevada. I'm going to say at least 18 years ago, and I actually had a whole bunch of their employees around me. I think there was about 8 to 10 BLM officers around me taking notes of what I was talking about, and I didn't even really know my stuff back then. But I was telling them I'm not gonna get a wood permit. I'm not gonna pay any fees. I'm not gonna do any of that kind of stuff because I know it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So this next meeting I have, it's going to be really good because everybody needs to learn the real realities of law. Everybody needs to learn the real, just like an officer. If somebody wants to be an officer, because I told this to that guy yesterday or the other day, I said, you have to have a driver's license to be able to drive your vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I don't need a license. I'm not an employee. I said, you have to be insured. You have to have all the documentation, what they call statutory. He has to be documented because he's an employee who works. I said, but I'm an Indian. If I break down, I break down. If I get in a wreck, I get in a wreck. If I cut my leg with a chainsaw, I gotta heal myself. But he agreed with me on everything. He tried to say some little things, but in the majority of it, I had to remind him that in order to have that badge, you had to take an oath. And I know your oath. I don't know every word for word, but every officer, agent, judge, they have to have an oath of office. And the majority of the oaths of office, I think they're all similar, that they oath to protect and defend the Constitution. It doesn't matter what Constitution, but I've actually got certified copies of, I think I have about 4 black robes and about 3 district attorneys. I've got about 3 county sheriffs' oaths of office. And, that's what we have to hold them to, their contract. That's what they took an oath to contract to defend and protect the Constitution. And they're bound to it. So, basically, we have to hold them to it.
Right. And so people know that's Title 5, 331 through 333 is their oath of office.
There's a big paragraph, when it talks about the oath of office too.
Yep.
I put it in all my documents because, like I said, if somebody wants to be, just like a judge, if he wants to, basically, even if you go to the hospital, there's all these people wearing white jackets. They look like doctors. Well, how would you feel because I was telling my nephew this the other day, how would you feel if you went into the hospital and some guy wearing a white jacket, looks like a doctor, turns around and takes out your kidney? And he really wasn't a doctor. But they have to have credentials that prove that they're a doctor and they can actually do what they say. It's called a performance contract.
Right.
And, they can't do it if they don't have that contract. But like with us, we don't have to have a contract because they're supposed to protect our rights. And that's what I told this federal officer. I said, you're actually supposed to be protecting everything I'm talking to you about. You're already supposed to know it. I shouldn't have to. We don't need to be going to court and then me have to produce 1,000 or 100 documents that show you what your duties are. You're supposed to already know it. And if you don't know it, you better start learning. You better relearn. Because I'm learning it already. But like I said, it's really great, and I feel good about it. And I want to win this driver's license case, and I want to finish that hunting case, and there's some other things I can't really talk about. I don't really want to talk about it because it's pretty lengthy anyway. But the main thing is that yes, there's a few Indians here and there, and then one of the things I forgot to say about that state trooper episode, the state trooper sergeant, one of the first things out of his mouth was, he said, "Well, we're all informed and we're aware of you patriots and you freedom fighters." And I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm not one of those." I said, I'm an original man of this land. You all know it too. I said, but these guys that you were talking about, the freedom fighters and the patriots, I said that they are correct and I do support them. Then, it wasn't about me mouthing off, but I basically was talking back and forth, man to man, to all of them. They were all men too. Then at the end of it, the three officers that were on my driver's side, they actually shook my hand and, told me good luck. Same thing with the federal officer yesterday. That's how we parted, was I shook hands and I said, well, it'll be good to see you again. So that's what I'm talking about, peace. I'm not going to run around with a gun or bat or threaten anybody. I'm trying to show law, the supreme laws, and that's about it.
Gotcha. So it has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, like I said, I feel good about it. The bad part is, my kids, they seen me get arrested. My kids had to see me go to court. My kids have seen a lot of stuff, but I had to tell them all. I said, don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Don't worry about me. When I did go to jail, it wasn't for anything stupid like drunk driving or whatever. It was all about to see if I would surrender, to see if I would waive my rights, and I never did. So after a certain time, they had no choice but to let me out. But I made it through there, and it was actually the police actually treated me pretty good. They called me the good Indian. I got no complaints the way I was treated. I don't want to go to jail anymore, but if I have to, I'm not one of these guys that cause a scene or anything. And matter of fact, in my documentation, I put it in plainly on black and white in my remedy and claims that I stand under that $1.8 million a day for false arrest. I've taken that very seriously.
Right. And that is the main point.
We got to take everything seriously. So basically, we have to have a remedy and claim in any types of, whether it's an administrative or whatever process.
Mm-hmm. No, the main point is learning how the system works compared to what people think it does.
Well, one of my favorite guys, I think, is Rob Ryder, where he kind of like opened my eyes and ears about in the laws of equality and equity. If they want to charge me $2,000 for no driver's license, no insurance, statutory law or statutory policies, code, well, not just me, but anybody else, you got a right to give them a fee for your time and energy when you're right, you're correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I did let's see, it's not a proclamation. I can't remember the word I used, but anyway, in it, there's a black guy from across the way. Shoot, I can't remember his name, but I think his name is Anthony Williams.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
He's a private attorney general now. Anyway, he has a lot of good info, and I've seen a document he put together about your right to travel freely, and it's called like a declaration. But anyway, mine's about 9 pages. So when I got stopped this last time, or when I get stopped, I'll hand it to the guy wearing the badge. And I told him, you better read this before you want to contract with me, because these are the laws that protect my rights. So this last police officer or policy enforcer that gave me these tickets, he ignored it. He didn't want to take the time to read that declaration. So now he's in violation of it all. U.S. Code, treason. I looked at everything I could do, and like I said, there's so much good information out there that it's up to you to put it together.
Yep.
From 1 to 100, or 1 through 10, or 1 through 500. One of the best things about these contract courts, David Pierce is known for saying all courts are contract courts. If you have no contract, there's no contract to dispute. So if you get pushed and pulled into contracting with a so-called court, well, you got to arm yourself with your own documentation and your affidavit. And the funniest thing is, these courts, they'll never rebut it because they can't.
Mm-hmm.
All the affidavits I've done so far, not one so-called official has ever rebutted anything I've said. And of course, I've rebutted everything they said in writing and by mouth. So it's getting better.
Yeah.
My phone's going to be dying out pretty soon. I didn't want to take up too much time of your show.
No. We are glad that you were able to be here, speak up, and get some more knowledge out to people, because people need the knowledge of the truth compared to the structure they've been taught to believe to live in.
Well, if you want to believe in fiction, go ahead. But, the majority of us want life.
By the way, did you get my letter from the senator of Arizona that says you don't need a license to travel?
I haven't been able to see anything like that yet.
Okay, well, I'll have to email it to you, but I've sent it to you messenger, too.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, because I told you that's been certified by his office, so that helps too in those things. And I've got one that I'm getting ready to send the Oregon State House and Senate on the rights to travel, and I'm going after them still, because I sent them a letter recently too to ask them who owns the children. Of course, we weren't going to get a response back from that. But they're paying attention, that people are paying attention to the circumstances and the truth.
Well, I'm not bragging, but I actually killed the driver's license the best way I knew how, which is to the Nevada State Department of Motor Vehicles. I think I started it back in 2012 on paper. And I walked in and handed them their copy, and I had them stamp both copies, and I kept my copy. Mm-hmm. And then I updated it about a year later, gave them another notice. Then I gave them another, that one was certified. Then I gave them another notice, certified. Well, the last one, I did a registered mail. And I've learned some I don't want to call them tricks, but I've learned some extra things that the Postal Service is actually very helpful in, and they're pretty powerful if you use it correctly. So right now I've got about 60 pages of documents just pertaining to the driver's license. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put them all together in order, and I'm going to have them binded as like a book form. And then I'm going to take a copy to the DMV and have them stamp theirs and stamp mine. And that should really seal it. But those are the types of things that we all have to do. We can't just sit back and, I mean, I've been stopped many times by different so-called officers, and the majority of them let me go. But there's always going to be one guy that thinks that, you know, he doesn't have to listen. So that's the kind of guys that, while he takes it upon himself to step over the line, if we're prepared, meaning that's the people, if we're prepared with our documentation and he steps over the line, well, that's his own problem. That's where, you know, he's liable for his own choice, using color of law, color of uniform, instead of just, you know, doing the right thing. But I'll let you go. Thank
Well,
you.
we appreciate it. Yeah,
What?
we appreciate you joining us tonight, and I know what you're talking about on that one because I went to DMV last year, trying to make sure I got it stamped and certified by DMV. And when I went into DMV, they said, "Well, you don't have a contract with us. We can't do that."
You were trying to get a license?
No, I've already rescinded all my contracts with them, certified mail, been through all that. But I tried to get them to certify my not having a rights to have a traveler's license. And when I went to did that, I realized they said they were going to me, "You don't have a contract with us. We can't do that." And I was like, "What?" I said, "You still have me in your system." And they're going, but we have you in our system, but we have no contract with you in our system."
Well, see, that's why what I learned was the registered mail is the best one.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you. I've done registered certified mail to them 3 times. So you are correct on that.
One of the things I found recently was, I don't want to tell anybody any bad advice, but basically, when you go to the post office, or when I go to the post office, when you do a registered mail, they have a roll of stickers with the numbers on them. They got a big sticker that they put on your envelope, and they got these little strips of stickers with the same number, the registered mail number. So I asked the postman if I could have my little strip of stickers, and then I put that on my document. I have a special place that says registered mail, and it's got a little line on my document. So I put the registered mail sticker on my document, and then I asked the postman to stamp it with his stamp. What I found out was that's another notary.
Yep. That's a valid point. You want to repeat that one so people can comprehend that one?
Well, I don't want to get anybody in trouble or whatever, but that's
No, they're responsible for their own actions, and we're not lawyers, we're not attorneys, we're not doctors, we're not professionals. All we are is living men and women.
Because when we do a document, we pay a notary, and I have a special spot for a notary on my document almost at the end of it. And it even says Notary of the Republic. So then the notary puts their two stamps, because they're notarying me as a living, breathing man, autographing, not signing. I don't do signatures. I do autograph, which is in print with my thumbprint in red ink. Then I turn around and put my thumbprint on the bottom corner of my document on the last page. On my original, I'll put my thumbprint and sign over that on the back page of my original. Because one of the tricks I've heard that they do is, if they have your document upside down, they say they don't see nothing. They can't see nothing unless you write turn over. But when you put your thumbprint and you sign it on the other side, it's almost the same thing as endorsing a check. So when you have a claim and you endorse it in the back, that's almost like signing your check, whatever you put on the other side. So basically, the registered mail, just like I said, when you go to the post office, the postman has a big old roll of the registered mail stickers. Sometimes I've seen two of them, but they always have one. They got the main sticker that they put on your envelope, and then there's a little tab, a little strip with the same number. And I asked for that. So when he gives it to me, I put that little registered number, identification number, on my document. Mm-hmm. Then I turn around and ask the postman to put his postal stamp over his registered mail number. I've had one post guy say he's not going to do that. And I said, well, I paid for my fee. I'm paying for my service. And he refused to do it, so I just go to another post office that will do it. But what I learned was, when you do that, that's like getting another notary. Mm-hmm. And the United States, well, not the United States, but the Universal Postal Union, the post office, they're federal and international. So that's why the registered mail is the highest, it's the best. But when you get them to notarize their own stamp, their creation, that even makes it more powerful.
Yep.
As fact. So that's why I said, with today's info, there's so many things that we can do and we should do, and it's going to happen. It has to happen. So
that's
then,
the point.
when you get your, you're paying for the service, your document goes to wherever it's supposed to go, and then they turn around and sign for it, which they can't get out of saying that they didn't receive it, because somebody signed for it. Then you get your green card back, and that's proof. So in my document, I save all my receipts also. If I'm going to do a document to the court, I save a gas receipt for $10 or $15, and I put it on my document, because I have on my documents, I'll have usually 2 receipt pages that are in regards to my document. So basically, I save all my receipts. If I go to the copy place and they make copies of my documents, or if I pay $5 for a notary, I keep all my receipts together, because I want my documents to be worth value. It's not just a piece of paper. It's not just, something that can be ignored. When you pay for something, it turns it into value, and nobody can ignore it. And that's one of the things that these courts don't do. That's why the courts, when they do their documents, it's all fake. It's a fiction. It's really not real. So we need to step out of that and, do everything that we can do to make things legitimate, or not legitimate, but real and fact.
Right.
And it also looks pretty nice.
Well, you brought up a good point there. Saving your receipts and putting it in your instruments the way you bring it up, and that's a good, valuable point for people to comprehend that one. For that way, so you're going after your reimbursement.
Exactly. So then basically when on my cover sheet, I'll actually write it down. Total pages 32. Total pages 25, 11. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a federal court or state or whatever, because they're in commerce. They're trying to pull you into their commerce. So guess what? There's supposed to be a fancy Latin word, that cavidius or something like that, where when you go into a court and you walk out and you're minus money, or you had to pay a fine or a fee and you're not happy with it, you've actually been robbed. That's where it's not in equality. But like I said, that fancy Latin word, it makes a lot of sense, and people don't get it. They walk out of court mad because they had to pay something, but they didn't do nothing about it.
Right.
And there's no statute of limitations when it comes to fraud.
No, that's a valid point, and that's one point people need to realize. With statute of limitations work in commercial industry versus free, our rights. Because statute of limitations applied in commercial law, it doesn't apply with the Constitution.
Well, we're always going to be able to hold them to their oath of office, because that's actually their biggest contract that they actually oath to by word of mouth, sworn oath, and in writing. So these Indian tribal councils, they're playing de facto government with all the. That's why the states, they know they could do whatever they want, because the Indian council, they just give them a few dollars and they will, they could go past them and, they don't have to. They think that they're immune right now, but they're not. And that's what we're going to hold them to, is their oath of office. That's the biggest thing. The penalties are high crime, treason.
Right.
Nobody can give themselves sovereign immunity. It's just a matter of how we go about it.
Which they cannot do.
So the tribe where I grew up, they think that they're the supreme, and they're actually profiting off of everybody and everything. And the sad part is the people really never thought they had a chance to do anything about it.
Correct.
But times are changing, so like I said, the information that I've learned so far, I'm sure there's more coming, and I'm doing my best to share with what I got, even if it's a little bit here and there. But it's going to get better really soon, everywhere.
Yeah.
But thanks again. My phone is beeping already, so I'm going to be dying out. But thanks again, everybody.
No, thank you for joining us, and thank you for opening up people's eyes to another point of facts and reality compared to what they live in.
Thanks for all your work, Ed. Take care.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. You have a blissful evening, and we thank you for joining us tonight. Anyhow, we'll talk to you soon. Anyhow, I'd like to bring to people's attention that the points that Kawashu were bringing, that's his name, compared to his given name, and there is a difference. And this is the point that is of value of what's going on with us, the people. Because we have to know our bloodline, and people say, well, your bloodline don't matter. Well, it matters in a racehorse. It matters in a structure that is given to people who, if you're royalty or if you're not. That is the one thing that people need to comprehend, this structure of what the truth is compared to what they think the truth is. And that is the one point that's standing up for your rights, not privileges. And if you're an immigrant, standing up for your privileges as an immigrant, but knowing the circumstances of how the Constitution works for lawful bloodline Americans versus legal citizens and nationals. And people say, well, nationals have nothing to do with anything. It sure does, because in the 14th Amendment that they passed administratively clearly states citizens and nationals. And that's where people have got to start comprehending how this actually works. Because this is the one thing that without people comprehending this to defend and educate their children, on these things. And this is our responsibility to educate the children. This is our responsibility to educate one another. So it's like what he's talking about, get things certified. Make sure that you know what you've got in your hand. Make sure that you comprehend what you are doing. And I know sometimes it takes people 4 or 5 times to read stuff, get it through their head, because sometimes we've been so indoctrinized that we do not see how to do these things. We do not comprehend how to defend ourselves because we were never educated in defending ourselves. We weren't educated in the system of republic form of government or Republican form of government, the way the court cases read that I have that says the Republican government is the government, not democracy. Democracy is a foreign agent. That's why when you go through these issues, always when you do your affidavits and information, always put in 1938 Foreign Agent Registration Act and put the actual comment says that if they're not registered, they go to jail. See, this is our responsibility. See, this is your responsibility to protect you and your family and your neighbors and your responsibility to your bloodline. And people say, Ed, you keep going off on the bloodline. You better believe I'm going to be going off on the bloodline. Because, see, if we don't protect the bloodline of this soil, this country, this universe that we live in on these 48 states united, there is no future. The only thing that keeps the rest of the world afloat is our Constitution. And that's a fact, folks. The Constitution keeps the rest of the world afloat because once we lose the Constitution, we have no rights. And that proves the rest of the world has no rights. So that way the Vatican and the churches can sit there, and the corrupt churches can sit there and run your life, destroy it. And if you, even they try to pass a law, administrative rule, that said if you didn't go to church, this was 15 years ago, if you don't go to church, you're breaking the law. Excuse me, what? I don't believe in that structure. I don't believe in that book myself. Because I'm native, and I'm not going to sit there and follow a structure from a foreign country, foreign native structure. And that's native to that country, England, not part of the United States, the 48 states, soil. And like I said, the other point is learning how to read these things, comprehending these things. And it's like when I was talking to someone earlier, and it's like they were told that the state of Oregon stated that there's only 3 CPS workers that are licensed in the state. Well, okay. Well, time to go after the non-licensed ones and then suing them personally for destroying your family, your livelihood. And people go, well, you're living off of the system, welfare. I hate to tell you, folks, technically there is no welfare, and the welfare that you claim is welfare is actually to protect we the people. We the people. It is to protect we the people. And once you comprehend that, that is to protect we the people. Then you start getting somewhere. Then you start going places. And that is the main point, is protecting we the people. So anyhow, I'm sorry I didn't open it up for conversations for him, for questions for him. We'll have him on again. We'll get questions again. But I wanted him to get a lot of this stuff out so people comprehend what the truth is compared to the separation of lawful and legal, what is native, what is not native. And these are things that we have to protect our bloodline on. We have to protect our circumstances on. And it's up to you to protect your children, because the system ain't going to protect your system for you. That's the one thing, they don't care about you. And as soon as you comprehend that your men and women that work for you do not care about you, and I've dealt with plenty of people that go, well, the district attorney did this for me, the district attorney did that for me, and then when it comes to something else, the district attorney wasn't standing up for them. So, and that's what I try to explain to them. Here's what the truth is. But that's the one thing that people don't want to listen to, sometimes, the truth of how it works compared to the fantasy people live in. And that is the sad part about that. And we'll have them on here in the next week or two, back on, and we'll set up a Q and answer structure with Kwashu, because I know that people have a lot of questions and stuff like this, and we'll get to those questions. But I wanted to open up the floor for him. I know he probably took a lot of time for some people, but I wanted to make sure that he finally got his stuff out and people were paying attention to the lawful and legal structure. And it does say, dealing with the structure, that the Constitution has to go by the treaties, and the treaties supersede the Constitution. That's been even proven in federal law, federal courts. So once people comprehend that the federal courts, do some things right, but when they do things wrong, that's when you need to speak up. And remember, when you get a summons or stuff, you don't have to answer, you don't have to go and accept their contract. And that's the one thing that people have to realize, that these are contracts with a foreign country. That's why these men and women have to, by administrative rule and law, register with the 1938 Foreign Agent Registration Act. And if you really haven't sat down and read it, I do encourage people to sit down and read it. That's why Comey is being indicted right now. That was the only way that they could sit there and indict Comey. That was the only way they could indict Comey. And this is where people have to comprehend how the system works. This is the one thing that people got to start learning, how our system works. Remember, our system is elected and public servant system. And it doesn't mean that you have rights above somebody else, because we're all equal. 100% equal straight across the board. There's nobody more powerful than the next man or woman, because the Constitution made us equal. The 14th Amendment never freed the slaves, and that's the colored folks, or any of us, that can go and apply and do this stuff. See, I was educated, and also, too, the other point on Social Security, I have the federal court cases. Social Security, see, that's another interesting thing. Social Security is one of those things that is, the Supreme Court stated it was Constitution. So it has a Constitution right, not privilege. So that is the main thing of comprehending the way it works. Now, I'm on disability fighting on that stuff because I was forced on Social Security. I paid into the system. I knew that it had these rights and I knew this stuff. But when I ended up being disabled, the old workman's comp system used to have the private sector and public sector. In the private sector, you got paid a lump sum settlement and you were on your own. You didn't sit there and play these games that goes on. You didn't sit there and play the circumstances that we were talking about. See, and that's why when they took away the public and private structure and put it all in the public hands, that is the one point that people have got to realize. And when you're fighting your cases dealing with DHS, remember fighting these cases with DHS is that they are a corporation. They are not a government agency. And so you have to sit there and, you have to sit there and realize what you're fighting and who you're fighting for and what you're fighting for and what you're involved fighting for.
If I may.
So anyhow, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, whenever you're dealing with CPS or whatever organization they're called in whatever state, one of the best questions I think, or one that you think, Ed, is to ask them, are they legislative, executive, or judicial branch? Which one are they under?
Good, valid point. Why don't you repeat that again so people get that again, so they have the chance to think about it?
Okay. Well, previously, when we've talked about the policy officers, you want to ask them if they get their power from one of the three branches of government, basically. Judicial, executive, or legislative. Now, they don't get their power from any of those. They can't prove it, they can't state it or anything. They actually get quite irritated at that. But with the CPS, the child stealers, I call them, they come in claiming that they're part of the government. Well, ask them, what part? Judicial, executive, or legislative? Which part do you answer to? Which part is are you part of? What part of that government are you from? And they can't answer it because they are a private corporation. Therefore, if they say any one of those three, they're committing fraud and they're impersonating a federal officer.
That's right. And that's why it's still so very, very important that people know this stuff. It's interesting because some of the schools now, I just got this information I got. Some of the schools I find interesting to deal with so-called terrorists that come in. They're putting 5-gallon buckets in the classroom with rocks in them. So that way they can try to defend themselves with rocks. Well, it has a thought. I can see the point, but also, too, when I personally went to school in the mid-70s and 80s, and this was actually in California, most of us kids, we all had arms. My little one that I used to have all the time was a pocket Raven 25. So, I mean, we all had arms. And then, most of the kids, when I went to school, even coming up here in Oregon in the 70s and 80s and 90s, everybody had their shotgun or rifle in the back of their vehicle or covered wagon. So that way, if they're going home and they can do hunting on the way from school to home to get food. And that's a big thing called food. We're not supposed to be forced into commerce, but as they keep logging and cutting down our forest, which I would like to see logging basically 70% stopped across the country because all these foreigners came in and want our logs, our wood, our information, our structure. So, I mean, I don't support logging, when it really comes down to it, I support gleaning, which I have been in process of with senators up at the state of Oregon in the past, putting information together on gleaning and that for public right-of-ways. And so, and then the other point was that when you see falling timber, you just cut it up. In the state of Oregon, I think those elected and public servants in the state of Oregon, you'll sometimes, when you travel down the road, you will see piles of wood on the road. Well, the public servants have been putting that out there on the wood to be picked up instead of them hauling it to the garbage dump like they normally do. And that's the one thing people got to realize, that these men and women normally haul this stuff to the garbage dump. Not everybody is going on out there stealing from firewood, because firewood is our right to heat ourselves. They want to put you all on electric heat, and let me tell you, electric heat is worse for your body than wood stove heat. That I know for a fact. I prefer electric heat over wood stove. So, but anyhow, I'm sorry, I didn't even open up things. We could open up things for comments if anybody's got anything to say. We'd like to get that out before we wrap up the show. So, why don't we go ahead and unmute the board?
All participants are unmuted.
So, anybody would like to bring anything in tonight? Okay. Well, yeah, go ahead. Was that a mumble from somebody or not?
Oh, may I?
Go ahead.
I thought the speaker done a wonderful job. Quite a learning curve. I found it interesting when he was talking about the government trying to get the Indians to accept their citizenship. And, you know that's the small c citizen, not the
right.
Lawful citizen. It's the legal national citizen. In other words, counterfeit, counterfeit, counterfeit. Counterfeit courts, counterfeit citizens, counterfeit legal versus lawful. The government is quite good at counterfeiting everything. That's all I have to say. That's it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, Kwashu brought in a lot of good points. We want to make sure that we get proper education to people, and that is a point when the 14th Amendment was passed by the Senate and House of the corporation, because remember, your Constitution is run out, your Congress is run out of Washington, D.C., run and owned by the religious Vatican. And New York City is owned by the Vatican as well. So it is learning how these things work compared to what we think they work. And once people comprehend how these things work truly, and to defend themselves and know the separation of the small c citizen is legal, the large c citizen is lawful, and that is the point of making sure that you know your lawful and legal rights. And that's all we're doing here, is trying to educate people, because we're educating ourselves, so that way we know our lawful and legal rights. So we want to make sure that you know it yourself, and especially dealing with the corporation as well as your elected and public servants. And that's the one thing, that you do have servants. And once you realize that you have servants, then that way you can have standing. Until you accept that these men and women are servants, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter until you comprehend this, what a servant is. All right, and a servant is just like when you hire somebody to maintain your garden, your lawn, cook dinner for you or something like that. You go out to a restaurant, that's a servant. And then you got a server that serves you. That's a servant to serve you. So, but anyhow, with that, if we don't have any further comments, I'll throw that out one more time. Well, if there's no other comments, then I would like to say, may the Great Spirit bless you, may Mother Earth feed you, may the Creator bless your bloodline and you, and our rights to be free, and our rights to have the common knowledge of how to be free, and to educate those around us to be free. And it doesn't matter if you're a legal immigrant. Illegal should be shipped out. I do support the walls being put up, because when it does come to the crazy point, there are countries right now that are actually living cannibalistically, literally, because of their structure of food resources that are being depleted, just like ours is. And when they keep letting 750,000 to 1 million people into our country every year, you got to realize when they do this, what are your grandchildren, great-grandchildren going to eat? 60% of the food in the grocery store is not real. It's plastic, cardboard, fake, man-made creations. So with that, I would like to say, may the Creator bless you, and you all have a blessed evening.
Thank you for listening to Education by Ed. It is currently March 25th, 2018, 7:37 Pacific Standard Time. And thank you for listening in and being more educated. For the more you know, the more you're able to actually... Exactly.
Yeah, that's right, kid.
The more you know, the more you're able to overcome a lot of these fraud obstacles and these lies that the servants have been putting in. I mean, back in the old days, if a servant wasn't doing their job correctly, they'd be fired or whipped, or even killed if they weren't doing their job correctly. So why aren't we doing that today? Oh, that's because the servants think they're the masters. It's about time they learned their place.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.